Welcome to Homeschool Help Desk. My name is Jana Cook, and I'm the Community Manager of Bookshark. For this session, I am joined with Gretchen Roe. She is the Placement Specialist with Demi Learning. Today, we're going to be talking about Math UC. Welcome, Gretchen.
Oh, thank you, Jana. It's delightful to be here with you.
It is our pleasure. We have a slew of people who are watching today who are just itching to get some answers about Math UC, the program, and how it works. But before we jump into that, why don't you just give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Okay. All right. I am a homeschool mom of 6. I had no intention of ever homeschooling. But back in 1995, my eldest daughter was told she didn't need to memorize her multiplication tables. And I knew that I was a hesitant mathematician and I wanted something different for her. So what I thought was a 3-month adventure ended up to be 21 years. My husband and I have 5 college graduates, and the caboose in our train, who laughs when I refer to him as that, is a sophomore in high school. And we homeschooled for 21 years. And then because of my homeschool involvement, I got involved in positions of advocacy and became friends with Steve Demi. And after I'd homeschooled 6 or 7 years, I found my way to Math UC. And several years ago, Steve Demi said, "Why don't you come to work for me?" And I said, "When are you going to ask me?" And so here I am.
Well, that's a testimony to your passion for Demi Learning and what they produce, that you, as a homeschool mom, you saw it enough to want to be part of their company.
I went through a lot of homeschool math curricula before I found my way to Math UC. I was a very reluctant mathematician, and I didn't feel that I had a strong math background. And my 2 eldest children went to a high school co-op for upper level math. So I dodged that. And then my 3rd child was out of sequence for that high school co-op. And it actually was a friend of mine who brought Math UC to me and said, "Here, this is what you will use." And we never looked back.
So why don't you go ahead and tell our audience a little bit about Math UC and its philosophy?
Sure. Math UC is a true mastery-based curricula, and we are K through 12. In fact, we have a K4, K5 preschool, depending on how you define it, program called Primer, which is, we title a gentle exploration of mathematics. There's nothing taught to mastery there, but from our first level of mastery, which is Alpha, through calculus, we teach math a little bit differently. We teach math a singular concept at a time. We look for a student to master that concept and be able to teach it back to us so that the student really can demonstrate their understanding. And, you know, if you have to show somebody else how to do something, that proves you really know how to do it. And because we're a student-paced curricula, kids move through Math UC levels at their own pace. Sometimes a parent will say to me, "Well, what do you have for 3rd grade?" And my question back to them is, well, what does your student know? Because we want math to be a solid foundation and to build from that solid foundation forward. And that makes a tremendous amount of difference for kids. So whether a student is a challenged learner or an exceptional learner, Math UC fits because it fits the student, and that makes a tremendous amount of difference.
So I am one of those students that only did what was necessary in math. I did not excel in any way, shape, or form. I often say that in college, they found the lowest college credit possible to give a college graduate in order to have said they did a math class.
Oh, see, you and I are kindred spirits. I chose my college major based on what I thought was the least amount of mathematics and was in way too deep when I realized I had to have 2 years of statistics. So, yeah.
So I think one thing that parents tend to ask, and you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said, when you come into homeschooling, you come out of a public schooling school of mind, you know, the school of thought. They want to know grade level, because that's how public school systems definitely work with children. So you're asking parents to kind of relearn first that they need to find their child's ability and not necessarily grade level.
Correct.
And then you have those parents who know that their child is math minded. I think it's a term we need to, maybe reinvent, because everybody can do math, and we'll talk about that soon, but are advanced in math. And so with your curriculum, you can start where the student ability is at, and then there are options to go through. You said you go through calculus. So let's say for the average high schooler, you really only need how many years of math on average?
Well, it really depends on the state. There's
Mhm.
some states that say you have to have 4 years of academic math. There's other states that say 3 years of academic math and some kind of consumer math. There's other states that say choose whatever you want, which, the latitude is lovely, but I wanted somebody to guide me toward what I needed to do. And so it really depends on your state requirements. In some states, we have reporting requirements, and in other states, we don't. So because we are talking about that particular issue, let me address that as well, because parents will say, well, if Math UC is not a grade level experience, what do I do with a third grade achievement test? Which I think is a legit question. And the truth is, if you're going through Math UC in our scope and sequence, it doesn't line up seamlessly with a scope and sequence for a public school. What it does give a student is a deeper depth and breadth of mathematical knowledge. So that third grade achievement test might not be your child's absolute best performance, because there'll be things presented there that your child hasn't addressed yet from a Math UC perspective. But I have to also be honest, nobody's ever asked me what I got on a third grade achievement test. So if you will use Math UC through our Greek series, which is Alpha through Zeta, you will have a student that by the time they take a sixth grade achievement test will perform better than their peers, because their depth and breadth of knowledge is vast. And I think that makes a tremendous amount of difference for kids.
And the longevity in math you see is you can start in, say, 4 or 5 and go all the way through high school. There are some programs that I'm aware of that don't go all the way through high school. So if parents do decide to start with Math UC or come into Math UC, they can rest assured that they'll have curriculum that they will need throughout the entire 12 years of schooling if
Correct.
necessary.
That is correct. In fact, my first experience with Math UC was actually at the pre-algebra level. I didn't come in to Math UC's Greek series until my fifth and sixth child. I was looking to help my third daughter, my third child, who was a girl, have a better pre-algebra experience. And we had had a very rough experience so far that year. We had tried 2 different curricula that had not met our needs, and somebody was in tears every day. Sometimes it was her, sometimes it was me, sometimes both of us. Math UC actually gave us the foundation for her to have success academically. She's a research biologist now. I think we met the mark.
Good. I think that will put some parents at ease when we're talking to parents who are just new at homeschooling. There's so many questions and there's so many choices. And I think the vision behind this session is just to help parents who are looking at Math UC kind of get a general overview of what the program is, and then to have that confidence that, yes, it is mastery based and that is different than other programs. And so that idea that your child is going to master concepts and maybe not go on to the next one until the next year, but if you continue through the program, they'll have a strong understanding of math and be able to do those higher levels, hopefully with ease.
Well, one of the things that parents are asking this time of year, in the spring of the year, they've started a Math UC level in September, and now they're finishing that level. Do we go on? What do we do? And from a parent's perspective, my logic is, why wouldn't you go on? Why wouldn't you have more math experiences? Math was a year-round subject at our house, only because I wanted my kids to keep their skills sharp. So that to me does make a difference as well. One of the things I often see with parents who are coming out of a public school system is they don't necessarily know what their kids' skill sets are. And we do have a placement tool on our website that helps parents define their kids' skill sets, but it also presumes the parent knows the skill set. And sometimes that's not as easy to define as it appears on surface. And that's where myself and my colleagues come in. We're available to help a parent with diagnostics, determine what your student knows. We want to place a student in math you see at the end of their knowledge, but correspondingly, we want to also make sure that their foundational skill sets are solid.
Can we banish a misconception that if parents do come into the program with a skewed understanding of their child's math ability and
Mhm.
say they place their child in a level, and as they're going through it, okay, there's maybe some holes, but their child they're getting it done, right? As
Mhm.
they progress through your program, even though it's mastery based, math is repeated in depth as the levels go on. Is that correct?
Yes. So, I'm really glad you asked that question because sometimes that's a misapprehension that because we teach one concept at a time, it sounds like we're not never going to visit that again. And that's not true. The way Matthew C designs its lessons is there are pages of our materials that are designed to practice and develop a confidence with a new concept. But then there are also what we call systematic review pages that allow a student to continue to practice with every concept they've studied and mastered to that point in time. And in a way, that more mimics real life. When math comes to us, it's like, whoops, okay, I got to work this out. So it gives us the opportunity to keep that skill set sharp as it expands. And I think that makes a big difference.
Well, I'm glad that you explained that because I've always thought, well, if it's mastery based, then you never hear about it again until you take that cumulative test at the end of the year.
Right. No, that's not really true. But you know what? I do often, I'm glad you asked because often parents will say, well, so how do I revisit materials? And so here's one of the differences between a mastery based program and an incremental program. We often say in homeschool circles, spiral, but
Mhm.
the definition really is incremental. So I, as a math curriculum developer, decide in advance how many times you need to see some particular concept to have a full understanding before it drops out of that cycle of revisiting that practice. The challenge becomes if it drops out before you have full understanding, I don't know where your understanding ended.
Mhm.
And so then your understanding is weak from that point forward. And that's why I think a mastery-based curriculum becomes a terrific vehicle for us to make sure that we've got everything that we need to be mathematically successful.
I like that, mathematically successful.
You don't have to like it, but
That's
you're never
right.
going to get away from it. You know what? We all have to address math. And one of the things that parents most often say to me is, oh, my son can do computational math, but he hates word problems. Well, when math comes to you and I as adults, it's a word problem. So we actually begin teaching word problems in the very first levels because we want to teach that as a skill, and being able to solve word problems is a learned skill. And so that helps kids develop a confidence. All of our word problems are designed to be built with our manipulatives. So that gives kids an opportunity to practice and visualize what they're seeing in the process of word problem instruction.
So, Gretchen, why don't you go ahead and tell our audience a little bit about your manipulative set? Because obviously your title is Matthew C. So that's a very big portion of how math is taught with this curriculum.
Right. And what Steve Demme says is it's unfortunate when it's Matthew almost saw. So I think that makes a difference. I'm going to grab this. This is actually one of our mathematical interventions. This is called AIM for addition and subtraction. And this is one of the programs that is not part of our scope and sequence mathematics, but this would be what we would use to help a student who perhaps is using counting as a strategy for addition and subtraction. There's nothing cuter than a 6-year-old who says 2 plus 3 is 5. But if you're doing that at 12, it means you're having to step out of the mathematical experience to count for the facts, and it just becomes an ugly proposition. It becomes harder and harder for a student to stay engaged. So when Steve Demme created Math UC several years ago, what he decided is that he would use manipulative blocks to be able to help students visualize what happens mathematically. And these are our manipulative blocks. This is what they look like. And we use these beginning in primer. We use these same manipulatives all the way through Algebra 1. So if I were teaching a student, I could say 2 plus 4 is the same value as 6. And you can visualize this, if I can get my fingers to cooperate, you can visualize this as here I have 2, here I have 4, and my total is 6. The difference between using this and using something like a counter, a little duck, whatever it is we see those things as individual items. Here we see 2 as represented by a block that has 2 little sections to it.
Mhm.
And so we can use these manipulatives to teach everything from counting to Algebra 1. And so that's part of our Math UC experience. And there's lots of math programs that use manipulatives. We're different in the fact that we use these manipulatives to teach everything from time to money to measurement to algebra.
So I have heard parents coming into homeschooling when they look at Math UC and its cost. There is that, ooh, that kind of a punch in the gut. That's a lot of money. But what you're saying is once you purchase those manipulatives, they then are used throughout all of the levels until you get to the higher levels. And then you are adding just a little bit more, correct?
Correct. So your first purchase in Math UC is your most costly purchase. And so if you're coming in at one of the Greek series levels, you're looking at spending $165. The vast majority of that cost is the manipulatives themselves. But those manipulatives transfer across grade levels. So if you were to come in as an alpha student, you'd use the same manipulatives all the way through Algebra 1. The only exception there is in our epsilon level. Epsilon is where we teach fractions. And here's an important factoid for parents. Knowledge of fractions, being able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions is the difference between a successful algebra experience and an ugly algebra experience. So your student has to be able to do that seamlessly to make algebra a good enterprise for them. And I don't think anybody, having used a dozen different math curricula in my 21 years of homeschooling, nobody teaches fractions as well as Math UC does. So the first investment is the most costly investment, if you will. That's where you're going to make the most investment of money. But then when your student moves into that second level of Math UC, you have the manipulatives, so your materials are about $90. And then if you have a second child who is moving into Math UC, the cost for that student is only the consumable student materials, and that's about $44. So you can see that as you progress, the cost becomes less.
Now, for families with multiple children, do you advise multiple manipulative sets, or is it definitely able to use one for several children?
Set of manipulatives for up to 4 or 5 children at a time. And I only ever had one set of manipulatives. Now, I laughed when you asked me the question because we always say, trust parents. Parents know their students best. And most parents are like, yep, I'm going to buy one set of manipulatives. It'll be fine. We'll all use it. But some parents have kids who are like, nope, everybody's got to have their own. And that's the way it's going to work. And parents know that best. So you only have to have one set. sometimes parents will say to me, can you use math UC without the manipulatives? Well, you can, but you're only going to get half the instruction. And truthfully, the manipulatives are the gold of the program because they allow a student to step along a mathematical continuum. What research tells us, and actually this is new research that's come out in the last couple of years, supports this 30-year-old math program that says that the best way to learn mathematics is to start with something concrete and then move to representational. What are you seeing in your head when you see those numbers? And the Arabic numerals are actually the final construct, the abstract concept, so when we see the number 3 and the number 2, we know 3 plus 2 is 5, but we've moved along a continuum toward that understanding. And that makes a tremendous amount of difference for students.
And as a homeschool parent, just listening to you explain that, I'm like, wow, that's opposite of how I was taught. I was taught numbers represent units instead of units can be represented in numbers. I think that flip-flop can make a huge difference in a child's.
It is. It's funny. I'm so glad you said units because that's what we refer to. We don't say one, as a place value. We refer to it as a unit place. So this is a little unit block. This little green guy is our unit block. And if you think about it, one of the things that we do with children is our language of mathematics is not specific. So I tell you in the number 325, what number is in the ones place. And if you're a young student, you're looking for the number 1. But if I tell you in the number 325, what number is in the units place, you know where to look. And of course, you know that that's going to be 5. And I think that makes a difference for kids as well. So we strive to be specific in our language to make that learning process easier for kids.
And I think making the learning process easier for kids in turn makes it easier for parents.
Yes. And, I'm so glad that you said that too, because parents sometimes will say to me, oh, I want a computer program to teach my children math because I'm not good in math. But what an awesome opportunity for you to model, as we were talking about, a growth mindset to learn right alongside your student. I have to tell you, if somebody had taught me math the way Math UC teaches math, I'd be a geologist today because that's what I really wanted to do. I loved the science, but I couldn't do the math that underlay it. And it really went all the way back to being weak in fractions. And that's probably why epsilon is my favorite level of Math UC, because it was a game changer for me as a parent to be able to walk alongside my kids and learn that way.
I'm constantly telling my children that had I had the opportunity to homeschool with a different math. Now, I actually did homeschool 8th through 12th grade, and I feel like it was a success, but 25 years later, when we see all of these different programs and, be it the internet so that you could find the different programs, it just wasn't accessible the way it is now. It was more word of mouth. But I tell my girls all the time, like, my life could have turned out differently because I always thought I wasn't a math person.
Mm-hmm.
Now, homeschooling my own children, I get really excited about math problems. And if I can't figure it out, I'm with the piece of paper right there along with them. And when they're having a challenge, they'll say, Mom, grab a piece of paper and let's do it together. And so we both have our piece of paper and we're doing it together. I've learned that I really enjoy math. I was an English major. I would have never said I enjoyed math, but this beautiful opportunity of second time around with my children, I feel like I am like you, I'm gaining this knowledge and an appreciation, and hopefully my children are picking up on that. So while they are more artistic or they like the arts or humanities, but they can still do math well. And we all as parents want better.
I have a colleague named Sue Wachter. She's an artist as well as a mathematician, and she works alongside me. And one of the things that she often says is we make the mistake to believe that if you have an art fascination and a talent for art, you don't need mathematics. And she said, the truth of the matter is artists are some of the best mathematicians, and we really need to tap that, but we need to tap that in a creative way so that an artsy kid can have a successful math experience too. And I think that's one of the things that these manipulatives allow us to do, is they allow us to visualize. And those of us who are have naturally more bent towards artistic expression, this makes math understandable for a lot of kids.
I immediately thought of Leonardo da Vinci. He's was
Yes.
an artist and a brilliant mathematician, but I don't think we typically put those two together.
No, we don't. Well, and I think we in the last maybe generation have started to pigeonhole, kids start to specialize in a sport at 5 now, instead of playing a whole variety of things and seeing what suits their personality and those kinds of things. And I think maybe we need to go back to a little bit of that, of giving our kids a solid experience mathematically, and then let them decide with all the doors open. And that, in my placement conversations, particularly with parents of high schoolers, when I have a parent who says, well, my son is struggling or my daughter is struggling mathematically, my conversation will drift away from math to, well, what does she think she wants to do after high school? And depending on what that is, that becomes the goal setting. Then let's work backwards for what do we need to do to make that opportunity possible for them, to keep that growth mindset open.
Another beautiful depiction of why we homeschool, because
Yes.
we can personalize for our children, and
That's right.
not to say that they don't have to do things that they're not good at, or that there has to be some striving, but with a goal in mind, we can then navigate for them personally what's going to be the best for them.
Right. And, I think that's probably one of the biggest beauties of homeschooling, is to be able to allow your children to figure out how they learn best and help them advocate toward that.
So, talking about advocating for our children's education, parents are going to want to know the time necessary for them to be teaching this to their children.
Sure. And, that is a really a valid question. And parents often say to me, oh, I have multiple kids. How am I going to make all of this fit? Well, there are portions of instruction for you and portions for your student. And all of us have a variety of kids. Some of my kids have been very self-directed from a young age. The majority of my kids really needed me there with them lockstep until they were about 6th or 7th grade. A couple of my kids, I sat on and hatched them like an egg until they were in high school, because they tended to be too distractible. One of the things I think that is important about math, you see, is we strive to make a math experience a developmentally appropriate one. So what learning theorists tell us is that students have an attention span of their age plus 2 to 3 minutes. So your 10-year-old child has an attention span of 12, maybe 15 minutes. And beyond that, it becomes an exercise in perseverance. So we strive to make that math experience appropriate. And, as an aside, when I first looked at math, you see, when I began homeschooling, my first thought was, well, that's not enough math. And the truth of it was, I had the misapprehension that we often have, if you're not really good at something, doing more of it makes you better. And that's not necessarily the case. So when a parent approaches, particularly a parent with multiple kids, approaches a Math UC experience, they need to watch the DVD instructions. So each lesson has DVD instruction that comes with it, and that instruction is delivered either as a DVD or online as streaming video. So they get it both ways. They need to watch that instruction. The instruction is how to use these manipulatives to illustrate the concept. Then they need to pull, one of our instruction manuals, and there will be 2 to 3 pages in here that correspond with the lesson. And the pages of the instruction manual are why. Why are you teaching this concept this way? So the DVD and the instruction manual become the instruction. But once a parent has familiarized themselves with the instruction, then it's just sit down with your student. So if you have an alpha student and a beta student, your work might be front loaded in the week that you need to watch the alpha video and read the alpha instructions, watch the beta video, read the beta instructions. But then the practice for that becomes your students. And you become the resource and the guide and the person to be there and answer questions and those kinds of things. The most important and valuable experience of a Math UC experience is that teach back, because we expect at some point the student is going to say, I got this, I know how to do it. Let me show you how. And you need to have known what the instruction is going to be so the student can show you. And so there may be more work in the beginning of the week, and then there's, work at the end of the week, because every level after primer, we don't have a test booklet at primer, but every level after primer comes with a test booklet. For 5 years, Steve had no tests at all. And then parents said, hey, we just really want a measure of how our kids are doing. So we really want some tests. You don't have to use the test booklet. It's up to you. But from my perspective, you and I as adults experience test situations all the time. Isn't it better in a homeschool environment to teach our kids how to take a test, to just look at it as another kind of experience? We expect that when a student gets to a test in Math UC, they have mastered the material, they've taught it back, and they don't need these to be able to do that test environment. If you're in a state that requires accountability, requires you to prove that you've done it, often the test booklet serves as that accountability to prove that your student has mastered the materials. To me, the test booklet was invaluable because occasionally you think, yeah, we got this. And then you take the test and you're like, oh, well, maybe we don't have this. So that was my system of checks and balances to know I needed to step back into the materials.
So let me have you clarify, is the DVD for the parent or the student, or does it start off for the parent in the lower levels and then become the students as they get into more independent learning?
All of those things.
Okay.
That's great. The DVD the original concept of the video instruction was for the parent, because I would have no earthly idea how to teach a math lesson using these if somebody didn't show me how. Most of our families watch the DVD with the student as well. It does create that ancillary benefit of Mr. Demi becomes your math instructor. And I don't know about you, but I'm not always the prophet in my children's land. But Mr. Demi says you need to show your work. And so I can say, hey, Mr. Demi said you have to show your work. And so it becomes a beneficial relationship. Now, my youngest son has been fully independent in his mathematics instruction since he was in about 5th grade. And occasionally he'll come to me and say, okay, I watched this math instruction and Mr. Demi said, blah, 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 blah. Help me understand. So I kind of need to know what Steve said so that I can help him understand. But frankly, I haven't had to help him work through a math problem in probably 3 years. Occasionally he'll come in, as you said, work through this problem with me. Let me see that I understand this. One of the things I think that is beneficial about Math UC is we encourage you to verbalize as you work through a problem. And sometimes as parents, we forget that verbalization is another vehicle for learning. So Steve models that well in the videos. And I think that sets kids up for success to be able to go, okay, this is how I should be doing this. Math UC calls it build, write, say. And we want students to use that with every concept that they practice because it allows us to bring as many senses to the table as possible.
So I hear you giving me permission to continue to talk out loud as I work through all my adult issues.
All the time.
All the time.
Sometimes it's the only wise counsel I receive in a day.
My children are constantly, who are you talking to? And I say, well, myself, of course, just working it through.
Here, just leave me alone. I'll be done in a minute.
I sometimes jokingly blame my mom because she read out loud to us for so long that auditory processing is so ingrained into me that even though I can write it and I can think it, if I don't say it out loud, it's not till that I hear it that it actually clicks for me.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. Sometimes we'll get a phone call from a parent and they'll say, "Oh, we're really, really struggling with this math problem." And one of the things that we'll often say to them is, "Are you walking yourself verbally out loud through the steps?" And you'd be amazed at the number of times that you can hear the students say, "Okay, first I do this, and then I do the oh," because that language component is so beneficial to the process.
So it sounds like Matthew C definitely has that natural learning approach because you're reading it, you're seeing it, you're hearing it, and this is really how humans learn anything.
Correct.
And why we take it away from education when we're trying to teach new concepts to these little humans who are soaking everything up, and all of a sudden we stop one or more of those processes and we expect them to be able to get it, and
Mhm.
we're not using this natural approach in which I never knew you could use it in math. I thought math was its own entity that you just did until you had to, and you hated it a little bit less, but it wasn't something that you could learn to love. I have one that did not like to read. She could read. It didn't click for her for a long time, and I kid you not, yesterday in the car she looked at me and said, "Mom, thank you for encouraging me to read books." She's 15. I was like, okay, you're welcome. Now I said, now if we can just get dad to get on board with that. So I just have, we all know people who don't like to read, whatever the reason. And so I feel like the more I'm learning about math, it's all the same concepts. We have this idea like we don't like math. Well, of course, because you weren't taught in a natural way to, you don't have to love math, but you
Well,
certainly
one of the
can like
things,
it.
it's funny that you say that, because one of the things that we all have done because it was done to us is something like a flashcard. Here you go. Here's a flashcard. And we make the misapprehension all the time that flashcards teach. They don't. If you think about this, flashcards are designed to help you become proficient at what you know.
Mhm.
They don't help you with what you don't yet know. And sometimes we inadvertently set ourselves up for failure because we create math anxiety where it didn't exist. We think that math becomes more proficient if we apply a time constraint to it. But if a student is hesitant, it actually becomes an anxiety provoking experience. So sometimes at Math UC, we're as much about helping a student reframe math in a positive context as we are about teaching them mathematically.
Well, that is incredibly refreshing to hear. I think hopefully a lot of parents will just kind of be maybe take a deep breath and look at what's been going on in this year of homeschooling and what has worked and what hasn't worked. And maybe some of just that we've talked about is going to help a little light go on and go, oh my gosh, that's a step we're missing, or this is what we need to incorporate. And maybe this becomes less tears, less stressful, less anxiety ridden, even this last quarter of the school year,
Right.
and they
Right.
can enjoy it.
Probably the most common conversation I'm having right now with parents is parents who have had a belated wake up call that math is not going well, whether they're a homeschool family, whether they've pulled their child from school, whatever those circumstances are. There is an inherent connection there with feeling guilty as a parent. And what I think is really valuable for a parent to understand is you didn't make a poor decision when you chose whatever avenue you chose. You made the best decision at the time. And now you have new information that says, oh, maybe that wasn't a great decision. To be able to make a new decision and reorder a student and help a student be successful is a humbling experience from my experience walking alongside these parents, but from the parents' experience to go, well, okay, So there were things that we missed, but we can fill those gaps. And one of the things that Matthew C. excels in is making an individualized experience for a student, making that math experience the student's experience so that they can be successful. So if we have a parent who is struggling, we always encourage, whomever they get their materials from, whether it's one of our distributors like Bookshark or whether they purchase from Matthew C., we want a parent to have success. So we always say, give us a call. Everyone on our staff who works with parents has either homeschooled themselves or been homeschooled or been involved in positions of homeschool advocacy for a bajillion years. And so we know what it's like to sit in your parents' seat. And we want you to have the best experience possible.
Well, I think that as a homeschool parent, just to hear that to give permission to say, hey, maybe we weren't on the right track. Maybe we ordered the wrong level. Maybe we need to reevaluate, that there is only benefit to your child in doing those things. I think immediately I kind of tense up and go, if I've made a mistake, I've got to own it and push through and pull myself by the bootstraps and get going. And unfortunately, I've seen that type of thinking trickle down to my children. And when I see it, I go, no, we need grace. Like, we need to just stop and start again wherever we ended. It's okay. There is no timeline. There is no set, it has to look this way. And I think homeschool parents, when this is new, they don't understand that freedom. Right? Because when you're in a public setting, you need to accomplish so you can move on. And there's a negative connotation to be there, either held back or reviewing. It's a negative idea. And really, if we want our children to succeed, we should really push that's positive, that we're going to stop, reevaluate, review, because only when you have a solid foundation can you be successful later on.
Right. And often when I have a conversation with a parent, for instance, the reason that AIM for addition and subtraction and our newest program, AIM for multiplication, were developed was because we found these older students, middle school, even high school students who had weak foundational skill sets, and it looked like they were struggling. Some of them had IEPs, some of them had 504 plans, some of them had parents who were just banging their heads against the wall going, why doesn't my child understand algebra? And when we started doing some specific diagnostics, we realized that often it's that lacking foundational skill set. And to say to a parent, you need to go back and fill that addition and subtraction skill set with your 13-year-old can be a scary proposition. And a parent would say, oh, I can't step back that far. But otherwise, it's like trying to drive a car forward with flat tires. You might get to your destination, but it's going to be a really long and uncomfortable ride. And the fascinating part of this experience of developing these programs has been to realize that just because you have a gap doesn't mean everything is a gap. And often filling one gap allows a lot of placeholders to fall in place behind it. We've seen kids who have struggled with algebra, who have filled an addition and subtraction gap, and then taken a run at algebra again and been successful. And I think that's one of the things that we as parents, when we homeschool our kids, we want the best for our kids. And sometimes that becomes a home improvement project. I have a colleague who says it this way. He says, you've got a vision of what you want, but it's going to be kind of messy for a while till you get there. And sometimes math is a home improvement project to fill in a gap.
Well, I hope that is very encouraging to people who are listening today, because I know it is to me personally. Let's just talk about a few more things. You kind of touched on the idea of math. You see people's concepts that it's too easy. And we already know that you explained beautifully how you need to take into consideration your child's age and attention span and what they're able to process, along with they are able to move through the program at their own speed. So they are doing really well and they've mastered it. They can keep going. There's no need to say, oh, sorry, close that book. We're done for today. I never want my children to be told, shut the book. I don't care how much fun you're having with that. We've got to move on. Like, so that is a plus. We talked about the grade level and the expense, that we don't need to worry about being behind or ahead because it's your child's individual experience. What about some of the parents who have had maybe some negative experiences with Math UC? Either their child wasn't grasping the concepts, or they've just felt like it hasn't been a good fit. Can you just speak to those parents?
Sure, absolutely. Not every key fits every lock. And one of the things that I love about my job is I can be very honest with a parent. And I can say, what are your goals? Often parents will say to me, nobody's ever asked me that. I haven't even quantified goals. I should have goals for myself, for my student. Yeah, absolutely. And so our purpose is to help a parent achieve what they want to achieve with their student. Sometimes that's a parent who says, I need somebody else to teach mathematics to my student. That teach back component is a vital element of Math UC. And if that's something as a parent you don't feel like the relationship or the time will allow, then maybe Math UC is not the best experience for you. By the same token, I mentioned parents who say, oh, I don't want to use the manipulatives. Yeah, well, and maybe Math UC is not the best experience for you, because these are vital to the academic experience, in our opinion. And, often we'll have a middle schooler who'll say, I'm not using blocks. I'm not doing that. I'm too grown up, those are for little kids. And I would say, from the parent's perspective, all you have to do is teach me what you learned with these, and then you can put them aside. But Math UC has been a tremendous experience for a bunch of families, and occasionally families will say, you know what, this didn't work for us. And that's okay too. Don't think that you are less of a mathematician or less of a parent because it was an experience that didn't work for you. Lots of my homeschool friends that I homeschooled alongside used other curricula. All roads lead to Rome. I just think that this is the best paved road. So, and sometimes parents will say to me, well, Math UC is only for kids who have learning challenges. No, because the pace is the students. It's a student-paced curricula. And, I vividly remember a young man that I met 7 years ago at a homeschool conference, and he was standing with his hand on the calculus book, and he looked way too young to be touching a calculus book. So I said, can I help you? And he goes, oh, I'm just saying goodbye to Mr. Demi. And I said, saying goodbye? He goes, yeah. He said, I'm taking math at the community college this year. And I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, it was inappropriate for me to ask him, but I said, how old are you? And he said, well, I'm 12. And I said, and you're taking math at the community college? And he said, well, yeah. He said, Mr. Demi says when you can demonstrate understanding, you can move on. And I was like, okay, Gretchen, I got it. So, every experience is tailored to the child and the parent together. And if Math UC is not a perfect experience, one of the things that I think is terrific about Math UC, and I love working for this company, is Steve offers a money back guarantee. And there's not a lot of math curriculums that do that. You use our materials for 60 days, we don't deliver, it doesn't feel like it's the right fit for you, we'll give you your money back. And there's not a lot of companies that'll do that.
I think that gives parents the confidence that if they were on the fence at all about trying Math UC and wanting to know if this would be a good fit for them, that they can order it with confidence, knowing that they can try it out. And if it's not a good fit, they have a money back guarantee from the creator of the
Absolutely.
company.
It does make a difference.
Gretchen, do you have any final words for our audience today about Math UC?
I'm just looking back through the questions that we had talked about, and I just want to see that I didn't miss anything. You did ask me one question about workload. What does a week look like? What can you anticipate? Most of the Math UC levels have 30 lessons. And we anticipate if it's a new experience, a student will go through about a lesson a week. But remember that student-paced experience may mean you go through 2 lessons 1 week and then you're stuck on a lesson for 2 weeks. It really is at the student's discretion how quickly they move forward. The anticipation is that they'll do 1 page a day. Do they have to do all the pages in a lesson? No, because if they can demonstrate understanding, then they can move forward. I always say to the parents, you use as many pages as necessary in the practice for the student to demonstrate, but then I always recommend that the student at least complete pages E and F of the systematic review, because that meets the obligation you talked about of, well, geez, in mastery, does it mean you never visit the problem again?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's always my recommendation to parents. Math to me is an experience that is different for every student. But Math UC, I think, is unique in the fact that we can help a parent who is not math confident like I was and help them have a successful math experience. We can have a parent who's very mathematically competent and their student can have a successful experience. And sometimes it's those of us who just understand something naturally that are the parents who are the hardest teachers, because we want our student to get it just the way we do.
I want to thank you for taking the time for being here on this session of Homeschool Help Desk. I hope that our audience has gleaned some tidbits to either help the current curriculum that they're using, or the idea of maybe switching over to Math UC, or the comfortability of picking up Math UC in their next school year with their children.
Well, it's been my pleasure to spend this time with you, Jana, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the program. Whether parents use Math UC or another mathematics curricula, that value of being able to have a student show you what they know is invaluable. And as we talked before the recording began, the most valuable part of a mathematics experience is not when you get it right. It's what do you learn from what you get wrong. And so I hope that if parents have questions, they can certainly call the company. I am happy to guide them and direct them and return them for their Bookshark purchase, which would be terrific. We just want to see that kids are mathematically successful. So thanks for the opportunity to spend some time with you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next session.